It was raining when I pulled into the lot. The kind of gray rain that doesn't fall so much as it hovers, misty, stubborn, clinging to every surface like a secret. I remember checking the clock. 8:50 a.m., 10 minutes early, as always. A small ritual of mine. I liked to sit in the boardroom alone for a few moments before the others arrived, straighten my papers, arrange my thoughts, let the silence breathe. But that morning, when I opened the tall glass door to Whitmore Skincare's executive floor, something felt off. The receptionist avoided my eyes. The usual greetings were replaced by murmurs that stopped just as I passed. The kind of silence that isn't quiet, just tightly wound. And when I entered the boardroom, I saw it immediately. The table, long, mahogany and cold, was set for 10. But there were only 9 nameplates. Mine was missing. I stood there, still dripping from the rain, my umbrella trailing droplets across the polished floor like tears I hadn't cried yet. Daniel didn't look at me. He sat at the head of the table, my chair, and scrolled through something on his tablet like I wasn't even in the room. I waited for someone to say it was a mistake, a misprint, a joke even. But the meeting started without me. Due to recent restructuring, someone began. I couldn't hear the rest. My ears filled with the roar of my pulse. I didn't sit down. I didn't speak. I just backed out slowly, hands trembling, heart pounding, like I was watching my own life from behind a pane of glass. I stood outside the boardroom, the soundproof glass making the whole thing look like a silent film. My company, my dream, my people. And I was on the outside looking in, like a ghost in my own legacy. When Daniel finally came out, he offered a smile that was more pity than apology. "We should talk," he said. We sat in a corner office I used to call mine, now stripped of every personal touch. No photos, no candles, no wildflower vase by the window, just sleek lines and nothingness. "There's been a vote," he said. "The board believes your role is better suited for external branding. You've been distant. Lately, emotional. Emotional," I repeated, the word acid in my mouth. "This is my company, Daniel." "Our company," he corrected gently, folding his hands. "And yes, you were instrumental in building it. But growth demands tough decisions. The board approved a dilution of shares 6 months ago. Your ownership is no longer controlling." I stared at him. 6 months ago? That would have been during our anniversary trip, when he surprised me with a villa in Tuscany, when we made love under foreign stars and he toasted to our next chapter. "You lied to me," I whispered. "You orchestrated this behind my back." "It's all legal," he said. "You signed the agreements." Of course I had. He'd handed me the papers between wine and pillow talk, said it was just routine, restructuring. He'd kissed the back of my neck as I signed. My heart had trusted him. My heart had been a fool. I walked out of the building without another word. The rain was heavier now. I didn't put up my umbrella. Let it soak me. Let it wash off everything. I sat in my car, staring through the windshield as the water ran like veins down the glass. My reflection stared back, distorted and shimmering. A woman undone. My hand went to my wedding ring. I twisted it once, twice, then let my hand fall. I couldn't take it off. Not yet. How do you measure the moment your life ends but your body keeps breathing? It wasn't just a betrayal of business. It was a betrayal of belief, of memory, of every damn time I had said, "I trust you." I didn't go home. I couldn't. Instead, I drove, past the suburbs, past the city, past where GPS stopped giving directions. The highway was slick and empty, and the hum of tires on wet asphalt was the only sound that felt honest. Somewhere along the coast, I pulled over. The ocean stretched in front of me, dark, endless, loud. I stepped out of the car, walked barefoot toward the edge of a cliff I didn't know existed until that moment. I didn't want to jump. I just needed to see something that couldn't be taken from me. The waves didn't care who I was. They didn't remember the nameplate missing from the boardroom table. They didn't whisper or judge or lie. I stood there for a long time, until the cold bit through my coat, until the sky dimmed into ink, until the grief in my chest stopped clawing and started curling inward, quiet and tight, like a sleeping animal. He didn't just cut me out of a company. He erased me, strategically, silently, legally. It was no accident. It was an execution. But as I stood on that cliff, one thought slowly crystallized in my mind. The kind that doesn't scream. It whispers. You can bury a seed, but it doesn't die. It grows. It started with my grandmother's mason jars. Thick, glass-stained vessels lined the back of her pantry, each filled with dried herbs, crumbled petals, and oils that smelled like earth and heaven. She believed nature could heal anything. And I believed her. I still remember how she'd mash calendula into a copper bowl with her thumb, hum a lullaby no one else remembered, and smear it gently on the scrapes of my childhood. After she passed, I found her recipes, handwritten in a linen-bound notebook, each page smelling faintly of lavender and ink. I began mixing oils in my tiny kitchen, labeling them with masking tape and hope. Rosehip for scars, chamomile for sleep, eucalyptus for grief. The jars lined my windowsill like sentries. I called the line Elowen after her. It wasn't glamorous. My first sale was to a friend of a friend. I packed it in brown paper, tied it with kitchen string, and kissed the label before mailing it. I did everything by hand. Labels, logos. A simple website I taught myself to code with shaky fingers and YouTube tutorials. And then Daniel walked in. We met at a small business mixer. He was wearing a navy suit that fit like it had been stitched. Onto his body, a dimpled smile, and a notepad full of numbers I didn't understand. He called my business a sleeping giant. Said it had scaling potential. I laughed. Told him I didn't speak spreadsheet. He offered to translate, and I let him. Daniel had a way of making you feel anchored. While I was chaos and clay, masks, he was balance sheets and 5-year plans. I loved that about him. I needed that about him. Within months, we were inseparable. He made my storms feel like weather I could live through. We married the following spring under a magnolia tree in my grandmother's backyard. I was barefoot, wearing a cream dress I'd sewn myself with uneven seams and wildflower embroidery. My perfume that day was a blend I'd made just for the occasion: wild rose, bergamot, and sandalwood. He leaned in as we danced and whispered, "You smell like home." For a while, everything bloomed. We moved Elowen out of my kitchen and into a shared studio. Then a warehouse, then offices. Sales doubled, then tripled. He managed the numbers. I handled the soul. He said we were a perfect match. Logic and magic. The dream team, he called us, and I believed it. People warned me softly at first. Friends with furrowed brows and too careful voices. Don't let him take too much control. Be sure, your name's on everything. It's easy to get lost in love and business, but I brushed it all off. They didn't know Daniel. They didn't see the way he stayed up with me during product launches, or the way he massaged my hands when they cramped from pouring oils into jars. He loved me. That had to count for something. Then came the small concessions. You're too stressed. Let me handle the accounts. I'll sign the lease. It's faster that way. Let's just move some shares around to make room for new investors. On paper, you're still in charge. He always phrased it like protection, like love. And I wanted so badly to believe that love could be a shield. The first red flag wasn't even red. It was beige, muted, forgettable. He started taking calls without me. Emails began to slip through the cracks. He'd rewrite parts of my speeches, saying I rambled too much. He said I wasn't great with numbers, and I laughed, because it was true. But then the board meetings began to feel like foreign films. I was watching without subtitles. I was still CEO, but slowly, my role shifted to symbolic. Smiling at ribbon cuttings, shaking hands, appearing in interviews where I repeated polished phrases from cue cards. The day-to-day decisions happened. Behind closed doors I didn't even know were there. I told myself it was growth, that this was how empires were built, by trusting the people you love. And I did love him. I loved the way he looked at me during interviews like I was still that barefoot girl under a magnolia tree. I loved the memory of us, even when the present began to feel unfamiliar. I remember one moment, a small one, but it sticks. We were at a gala celebrating the company's expansion into Europe. I wore a deep green gown. He had his arm around me, smiling for photographers. Someone from Vogue asked him what inspired the brand's origin. He laughed and said, "We both started it. But I handled the business, she just made the stuff. She just made the stuff." I laughed with everyone else, but I felt something crack inside. Quietly, like a hairline fracture you don't feel until it's too late. I went home that night and opened my grandmother's notebook. The pages were softer than I remembered, worn from my fingers. I hadn't touched it in months, maybe years. It smelled like something I couldn't name anymore. That's when I started to feel it. The drift, the quiet distancing. But still, I stayed. Because when you build something with someone you love, you think the foundation is stronger than doubt. You think love will hold. You think being barefoot at your own wedding means you're grounded. But love can be a leash too. And mine was stitched with contracts and kindness and for your own good. Now, looking back, I wonder how many times I confused surrender for trust. Because when I handed Daniel the keys to the kingdom, I didn't realize he was changing the locks. And by the time I noticed the door was closing, it was already sealed shut. The boxes were already wet. It had rained again. Heavily this time. Summer rain that struck the pavement like it was angry too. My things sat like forgotten donations on the front porch. A framed wedding photo, a silk blouse, the carved wooden bowl from my grandmother's kitchen. Everything I hadn't taken with me that night after the board meeting was now stacked like evidence of a life no one wanted to remember. I stood there for a moment, fingers trembling on the gate. Something, small and white, fluttered from a shoebox. Not a love letter, not a goodbye. A folded manila envelope, already soggy around the corners, stamped official notice. Petition for removal, irreconcilable behavior, emotional instability, dereliction of fiduciary responsibility. My breath snagged in my chest. That was the language of erasure, clinical, unfeeling, strategic. He was cutting me out with words I didn't even know how to defend myself against. I tried my key. Of course, it didn't fit. He'd changed the locks. It wasn't just business. It wasn't even just betrayal. It was exile. I didn't knock. What was there to say? I wasn't even sure I had a voice left. I loaded the boxes into my trunk, each one heavier than it looked. My wedding dress was jammed between a houseplant and a plastic bin of skincare samples. The absurdity of it made something inside me want to laugh or scream. I drove. I didn't know where. I ended up at a dusty roadside motel where the clerk didn't ask questions. That night, in a room that smelled like mildew and burnt coffee, I finally opened my laptop. I typed in the company's website URL. My fingertips hovered over the keys like they might burn me. Alohan.co, the page loaded slowly. And then, there it was. My name was gone. The founder's story now credited Daniel with the inspiration, saying the line was built on his passion for holistic wellness and a desire to bring ancient wisdom to the modern market. Ancient wisdom? That was my grandmother's voice in those formulas. I clicked through the product pages. New packaging, corporate branding, cold, polished. A line of creams called Legacy Line, stamped with Daniel's signature in faux gold cursive. My chest tightened. Then I saw it. A familiar logo I hadn't authorized. Inspired by traditional women's remedies passed through generations. I felt sick. That night I picked up a call from Lena, one of the interns I had mentored, a bright, nervous woman who once brought me chamomile tea when I had a migraine. Her voice was hesitant. "I thought you should know," she said. He's with Karina now. They've been seen at meetings together. Personal meetings, hotel rooms. Karina. She was our legal advisor. The same woman I once took to lunch after her divorce. I helped her rebrand her LinkedIn, wrote her a glowing review. I dropped the phone. The room spun. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It had a face. It had hands that had touched mine. Smiled across dinner tables, nodded at my speeches. I pulled out the shoebox labeled Grandma, Private. The linen-bound notebook wasn't inside. Instead, there was a folder. Legal filings, patents, digital scans of every page. The recipes had been cataloged, copyrighted, under a corporate name that didn't include mine. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled into the motel bathroom. The mirror was cracked at the corner, warped by years of steam. My reflection looked like a stranger, hair wild, skin pale, eyes rimmed red. A face not just tired, emptied. My wedding ring shimmered under the fluorescent light, still wrapped tightly around my finger like a secret I couldn't keep anymore. I stared at it for a long time. Then I reached for the soap, twisted the ring, free, and dropped it into the motel sink with a soft clink. It sat there, gleaming like a broken promise. "I don't know who I am without this," I whispered. And the silence answered back. For the first time, I felt what it truly meant to lose. Not just a person, not just a job, but a self. The version of me who believed in shared dreams, in barefoot weddings, in "we built this together." She was gone. Daniel hadn't just taken the company. He'd taken the narrative. He'd taken the story. But as I sat on the cool tiles of that bathroom floor, something inside me moved. Not quite a flame yet, more like an ember. Small, angry, breathing. If they thought they could write me out of my own legacy, they hadn't read the whole story. I wasn't soil. I wasn't a foundation to be built over. I wasn't the ghost of a woman clinging to love. I was fire. And the thing about fire, it doesn't mourn the match. It burns down the lies. I didn't leave a note. There was no one left to read it. I packed the last of my things, just the essentials. A few clothes, a worn leather journal, and the smallest glass jar that still smelled like wild rose and sandalwood. The scent was faint, nearly gone, but when I opened the lid, something old and sacred stirred in my chest. I drove until the road thinned into salt air. The coastal town didn't have a name worth remembering. That was part of its charm. Just a faded sign that said "Welcome Home" in chipped paint, hung crooked at the edge of a cliff. I rented a cottage perched at the edge of the sea. A weathered thing with ivy spilling over the shutters and a roof that creaked in the wind like it was telling stories. There were no mirrors inside. At first, I thought it was odd. Later, I realized it was a kindness. The days were long and quiet. I walked barefoot across cold sand, letting the waves nip at my ankles, the wind rake through my hair. My phone stayed in a drawer, silenced. No emails, no press releases, no Daniel, just me. I journaled, at night by candlelight, the pages soaking up my grief like the floorboards soaked up the rain. I wrote down the names of things I missed. My grandmother's laugh, the way rose petals feel when crushed between fingers, the sound of applause after my first pitch meeting. I wrote down the names of things I would not miss. Boardrooms, Daniels, voice during a pitch, Karina's smile. Too wide, too sweet. One day, while buying herbs from a roadside stand, I met her. Mags. Silver braid. Dirt under her nails. She noticed me eyeing a bunch of lemon balm. "You've got healer's hands," she said. "No, I used to," I whispered. "Then they're still yours." She invited me to her home, a rambling greenhouse stitched to a rickety cottage. She was a retired botanist who now taught coastal kids how to recognize sea moss and nettle. But when we were alone, she spoke of deeper things. Plants that didn't just soothe the skin, but calmed memories. Herbs that reminded the body how to be brave again. With Mags, I learned how to be still, how to crush lavender the way my grandmother did, with warmth, not urgency. How to distill clarity from rosemary and rebuild peace from calendula. Every morning, I came home with stained fingers and glass bottles filled with sunlight and patience. It started slow. I made a salve from marigold and shea, then a cream that smelled like pine and rosemary. I printed labels on brown paper. Nothing fancy, just a name, Sea and Wild. I didn't use my own. I wasn't ready to be her again. I sold them at the Saturday market, wedged between a fisherman's wife selling sea glass jewelry and a man who carved boats from driftwood. At first, people smiled politely. Then one woman picked up the small jar and uncapped it. She sniffed, stilled, her eyes filled. It smells like my mother's garden," she whispered. She held the jar like it was a memory made solid. I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled and handed her a paper bag. Later that night, I cried. Not out of sadness, but out of recognition. It was the first time in months I felt seen. Not for my title, not for my failure, but for the part of me that still made something good. Something that reached someone else. Something that mattered. Each week, more people came. Someone asked if I took custom orders. Another asked if I taught classes. I laughed. I hadn't laughed in weeks. Mags watched me with quiet pride. "You're remembering," she said one evening, as we brewed tea from chamomile she grew by the fence. "Remembering what?" I asked. "That you were never just the woman who stood beside a man. You were the storm that watered the seed, the flame that turned ideas into life." That night I walked the beach alone, a new batch of cream cooling on the windowsill. The stars were quiet, the waves gentle. I still wore no ring. But now, there was something else on my hand. Beeswax, lemon balm, the scent of eucalyptus. Work, creation, life. The mirror might have been gone, but I was starting to recognize myself. Again. In the way I stood. In the way my voice no longer shook when I spoke to strangers. In the way I didn't flinch at silence anymore. I wasn't the version of me that Daniel married. I wasn't the woman the boardroom erased. I was someone else now. Someone wilder, quieter, more dangerous in her peace. The kind of woman who doesn't need to be seen to know her worth. The kind of woman who can disappear and still leave a mark. A year passed without applause. No headlines, no lawsuits, no grand gestures of return. Just early mornings with cracked hands and quiet evenings by the sea. My little brand, Sea and Wild, had become more than a whisper in town. Someone must have posted about it. A niche beauty blog called it Alchemy in a Jar. And within weeks, I had a wait list, emails from boutiques in New York and Berlin, and a handwritten letter from a woman in Prague who said my night balm helped her sleep for the first time since her mother died. But I didn't rush. I'd learned what it cost to move too fast. To trust too easily. Instead, I trademarked my grandmother's full name, Maeve Allister, and quietly built an LLC under a new identity. My accountant never saw my real face. My shipping warehouse was 3 states away. There were no photos of me on the website. Just product, story, and purpose. Then it happened. I was boiling lavender when the email came in. A beauty industry alert from a mailing list I'd forgotten I'd joined. The headline struck like lightning across my spine. Whitmore & Coers announces, Heritage line inspired by lost heirloom recipes, I clicked. And there it was. My grandmother's face, a softened sepia version of her, cropped from a photo Daniel had once hung in our guest bathroom. They'd named the new line Maeve's Garden, a name I had whispered into tea, cried into beach wind, carved into product jars like a prayer. The formulas were twisted honey instead of beeswax, synthetic rose. Reviews were already rolling in. Smells like regret. Feels cheap. Where's the soul? I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I calculated. I pulled a box from my closet, a steel lockbox I'd taken from the cottage attic. Inside, my old journals, the real formulas, and something else, a flash drive. Years ago, before Daniel had become CFO, I scanned every one of my grandmother's handwritten recipes for safekeeping. Every change he made, every board meeting agenda, every email he sent under my name. It was all there. The next morning, I made a call. Celeste Monroe, investigative journalist. She'd profiled me for a glossy feature 5 years ago, back when the company was small and our marriage still looked like gold from the outside. She answered after 3 rings. Hello? It's May. I paused. Not May Whitmore, just May. Silence. Then a whisper. I always knew something wasn't right. We met at a small cafe 2 towns away. I brought everything. The flash drive, the old recipe book, even a bottle of Maeve's Garden that I'd bought anonymously online. She sniffed it and gagged. It's a bastardization, I said. And it's mine. Her eyes sharpened. Are you ready to go public? I shook my head. Not yet. I want to be in the room first. There's something biblical about walking back into the fire you were cast from. You don't do it weeping. You do it with ash in your veins and steel in your bones. I took the money I'd saved, not just from Sea and Wild, but from the tiny investments I'd made since vanishing. And, through a carefully constructed shell corporation, I bought a minority share in Whitmore & Co. Just enough to get a seat at the table. Just enough to watch their faces crack when they saw me again. The shareholders' meeting was set for late spring, exactly 2 years from the day I'd been erased from the boardroom. Booked the ticket. I ordered a custom suit. Slate gray silk, soft as shadow, sharp as glass. And then, on the morning of the meeting, I opened the old lacquer box where I'd stored the last remnant of who I used to be. The perfume. Wild rose and sandalwood. Faded but fierce. The scent of home. Of wedding vows whispered under magnolias. Of everything that was stolen. And everything I was about to reclaim. I dabbed it at my wrists, my throat, and just behind my ears. The way Daniel had liked it. Let him smell the mistake before he saw it. The meeting was held in the same boardroom, the same glass walls, the same cold espresso. When I walked in, silence fell like snow. Daniel turned, his face paled. Miss, one of the new board members began. May Allister, I said, voice calm. I represent Allister Holdings. We recently acquired a 4.2% share. Daniel's jaw twitched. I took my seat, directly across from him. He didn't speak for the first 20 minutes, just kept staring at the perfume hanging like a ghost between us. Then, as the presentation about Maeve's Garden began, I leaned forward, opened my folder, and slid a single photo across the table. It was my grandmother, smiling, kneading calendula petals into beeswax. Celeste had helped me timestamp everything, copyright filings, the journal entries, even the original labels I'd drawn with a calligraphy pen, and then, the final piece, a cease and desist letter tucked neatly beneath the photo, addressed to Whitmore & Co., citing trademark infringement and fraudulent use of protected property. Daniel reached for the photo. I covered it with my hand. "That's not yours," I said softly. He didn't respond. But for the first time in years, he didn't look above me. He looked at me, and he flinched. Emotional tone, rising tension, calculated confidence, and a deep poetic sense of sovereignty. This is not a vengeful woman. This is a woman who has reclaimed her narrative, not by begging for acknowledgement, but by becoming undeniable. The power shift isn't loud. It's precise. Grace has become her blade. The ballroom gleamed with rented elegance. Crystal chandeliers, waiters in white gloves, linen so starched it could have cut glass. The shareholders' meeting was dressed like a gala, as if gold trim could hide the rot beneath. They called it the Annual Visionary Summit. I called it the Last Supper. I arrived in black. Not mourning, not vengeance. Clarity. A long-sleeved satin gown, sharp at the collarbone, clean down the spine. No jewelry, no distractions. Just presence. At the registration table, I handed over my credentials, the Shell Corporation's paperwork, the official proxy for Alistair Holdings. "Ms. Wolfe," the host read aloud, blinking twice. "Representing new interests." I confirmed. They ushered me into the ballroom, past clinking glasses and forced laughter. Daniel stood near the stage, surrounded by executives in borrowed charm. He looked older. Or maybe it was just that I finally saw the cracks. When he saw me, he stopped mid-sentence. Color drained from his face like ink dropped in milk. I didn't smile. I took my seat at the reserved shareholder table, third row center, close enough to be seen, far enough to let him sweat. The evening unfolded like a play I'd already read. Opening remarks, performance metrics, glossy slides full of spin. Daniel spoke in sound bites, quoting vision and innovation like gospel. When he introduced Maeve's Garden, the screen filled with false nostalgia, sepia tones, fake roots. That's when they handed the floor to the shareholders. I rose, no rush, no raised voice. I didn't need thunder. The truth was loud enough. "Good evening. My name is Mae Wolfe, principal of Alistair Holdings." A beat. "And once upon a time, I was your founder." The silence spread like ink on linen. Gasps. Shifting chairs. Someone dropped a glass. Daniel's hand curled around the microphone stand, white-knuckled. "Before we proceed with another quarter of forecasts and falsehoods," I continued, "I believe you deserve the truth about the very products being marketed tonight." I opened the folder I'd brought. Inside, timestamps, patents, journal entries, the real formula, my grandmother's scanned handwriting, board meeting minutes with digital fingerprints, a copy of the marriage license, and beside it, the divorce filing, stamped and finalized 2 months prior. "The formulas you've rebranded," I said evenly, "were written by Maeve Alistair, my grandmother. The original patent filings, and the scanned journals, are dated 5 years before Whitmore & Co. was incorporated." Whispers rippled like wind through wheat. "Your CEO," I nodded toward Daniel without looking at him, "filed updated patents using modified ingredients, synthetic, cheaper, untested, and stripped my name from the archive. This was not only unethical, it was illegal. And I have the receipts." Celeste was in the back of the room. I met her gaze just once. She nodded. Her camera light blinked. "You were not investing in legacy," I said. "You were sold a forgery. And the woman whose name you erased has now reclaimed it, legally, publicly, and permanently." The room buzzed. A legal advisor whispered into a board member's ear. I held the space, Not with anger, with presence. Daniel stepped forward. "This isn't the time or place for—" I turned to him. "You don't get to decide that anymore." His jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Not in front of the board, not with that many eyes on him. I took one final step forward, so the mic caught the weight in my voice. "I didn't come here to burn this down. I came here to remind you that I built it, and whatever you think you own, you don't own me." Then I closed the folder, placed it on the podium, and walked away. Past the tables, past the exit, past Daniel, who reached out as I passed him. A ghost of a reflex, a last attempt. I didn't stop, but I turned my head just enough to whisper, "Next time you rewrite a story, don't forget who held the pen." Outside, the night had fallen warm and windless. The ballroom windows glowed behind me, flickering with nervous movement. I paused beneath one of them, just far enough to catch the reflection without being seen. And there she was. The woman in the glass, not the CEO, not the wife, not the cautionary tale. Just me, whole, sharp, and sovereign. I touched the place on my neck where the perfume still lingered. It didn't smell like home anymore. It smelled like freedom.